Hello, nonfiction writers. Whoops. It is Monday, the beginning of week 8. We're going to be thinking about first experiences this week, and if you want to write about a first experience that you've had that still remains powerful to you, that'd be great. If you're onto something else and you want to continue posting that in your small group, that's totally fine as well. But just thinking about first experiences and how we can continue to think about what we really want to bring to the page on a daily basis, I think is important. A reminder, next week is Thanksgiving week. We won't have class, so we have a whole month left together. We have week 8 and then Thanksgiving and then week 9 and 10. So it's great. We have a kind of an extra week that will be online together. Everyone's doing great work. Just keep it up. I like it when there's so much great chemistry in a class, so it makes me happy. I wanted to read just a little bit from Matthew Zapruder's wonderful book, Why Poetry? And I recommend it for any writer, even if you're not all that interested in poetry. There's a lot of good things to say about language and art and why we write. So I'm just going to read a little bit from page 47 of Matthew Zapruder's Why Poetry, and I think he has some interesting ideas that will be helpful to us as we keep writing together. So he says, the closer we get to the most difficult experiences in life, the more a great simplicity in language seems to be required, and the more difficult it is to attain. I'm going to read that one more time. The closer we get to the most difficult experiences in life, the more a great simplicity in language seems to be required, and the more difficult it is to attain. The temptation is overwhelming to attempt, and inevitably fail, to comfort others and ourselves with platitudes. It's hard to know what else to say. This may be why many of the greatest poems about death are unadorned. They help us to confront what is happening with the most precise language we can summon, to see it in its strangeness again. If we do not have the strength or will to summon that precision of language for ourselves, whenever we are ready, poetry can help us, or any great creative nonfiction as well. This poem by the Spanish poet Antonio Machado, 1875 to 1939, seems to me elementally simple, mortal, strange, and true. And this is At a Friend's Burial. They gave him earth one horrible afternoon, in the month of July under the fiery sun. One step from the open grave, there were roses with rotting petals among sour-smelling red geraniums. The sky pure and blue, a strong, dry breeze was blowing. The two grave diggers lowered the coffin, hanging heavily from thick ropes to the bottom of the grave, and on unresting it made a loud thud, solemn in the silence. The blow of a coffin on the earth is something perfectly serious. Heavy dirt clods broke on the black box. The air carried white breath from the deep grave. And you, shadowless now, sleep and rest. Long peace to your bones. Finally, sleep a still and true sleep. That's it. So Zapruder goes on to talk about the poem a little bit. There are only so many ways to place a body into the earth, and it always makes the same sound. Too many of my students know this sound, and once they realize this poem is actually about that moment, will often become solemn and recede into their own memories of loss. The poem is no longer merely an intellectual or academic exercise. The poem begins with a clear, unsentimental description of the funeral. There is one oddity of the phrasing right at the beginning of the poem. They gave him earth. This is a good translation because it is close to the original. In Spanish, the line is, Tierra le dieron una tarde horrible. Excuse my bad accent. It is just odd enough without sounding pointlessly weird. The translators chose wisely in not normalizing this phrasing, making it something like they gave him to the earth or even they put him in the ground. They kept the peculiarity of the phrasing in the original, though unfortunately in English the ambiguity of the Spanish pronoun le, which could mean either he or it, is lost, which means we don't get the implication that this he is still he, but has at the same time also become an it, a lifeless body. There is no escaping the actuality of death and burial in this poem. The roses with rotting petals, the heavy coffin, the thud, the silence, the clods of earth, and that amazing moment when the dust from the grave for a moment seems to the poet to be white breath, when of course it cannot be. We want to believe the dead are sleeping, but even in the deepest sleep there is of course the movement of breathing, and at the end of this poem we have sleep that is still, total, and true. Reading this poem, I think there is the suggestion that what keeps us alive is a kind of provisionality and imperfection. Alive, our sleep is not totally still, not totally true, and it is only in death that we find the resolution and sureness and finality that we might so often crave in life without realizing its connection to death. So that is from page 47 and 48 of Matthew Zapruder's wonderful Why Poetry. And I think we can learn from it as well as nonfiction writers to, as we approach things that are difficult, plainer language seems to be required, simpler, straightforward, precise language, but it's also really hard to do, right? So keep up the great work. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll be in Zoom again on Wednesday at 5 o'clock. And comes Jimi Hendrix to say goodnight. Bye, everybody.